He was the city's golden boy, a visionary leader loved by millions. James Carrington, the charismatic mayor of Los Angeles, embodied hope, progress, and the promise of a brighter future. But behind the carefully crafted speeches and the polished public image, there lay a secret, a deadly truth that would unravel his career, shatter his reputation, and leave an entire city in shock. It wasn't just a scandal. It was a tragedy, one that claimed the life of a bright young woman with endless potential, leaving her family devastated and a community demanding answers. How does a man with everything to lose make decisions that destroy the very people he claims to protect? What happens when power and fear collide in the most tragic way imaginable? This is the story of James Carrington, a tale of ambition, betrayal, and the devastating consequences of secrets too heavy to bear. Before we uncover this harrowing case, make sure to like this video and subscribe to Inspector Stan for more stories of power, betrayal, and the dark truths that lie just beneath the surface. James Carrington was the epitome of political success, a man who seemed to have been born for greatness. Hailing from a modest upbringing in Los Angeles, he climbed the ranks of the political ladder with charm, intelligence, and a keen understanding of what the people wanted. His progressive policies on housing reform, public safety, and education earned him widespread acclaim, particularly among working-class communities who saw him as a true advocate for change. At just 38 years old, he became the city's youngest mayor, celebrated not only for his accomplishments but for his magnetic personality and polished demeanor. To the outside world, James had it all. His speeches were inspiring, his public appearances commanding, and his reputation seemingly unassailable. Yet behind the carefully cultivated image was a man who struggled with deep-seated insecurities. James was acutely aware that his career and public persona were fragile, built on an illusion of perfection that he worked tirelessly to maintain. Every action, every word was calculated to preserve the image of the ideal leader, but this relentless pursuit of control left little room for personal authenticity. It was a weight he bore quietly, unwilling to let the world see the cracks beneath the surface. James's life took an unexpected turn one evening at a high-profile charity gala in South Los Angeles. The event was one of many designed to showcase his commitment to uplifting underserved communities, a hallmark of his administration. It was there that he met Alana Johnson, an 18-year-old artist whose presence lit up the room. Alana, fresh out of high school and brimming with ambition, had spent years perfecting her craft in hopes of escaping the poverty and violence that defined her neighborhood. Her art told stories of resilience and hope, capturing the struggles and dreams of her community in a way that resonated deeply with those who saw it. James was immediately captivated. Here was a young woman who embodied everything he claimed to champion, a dreamer, a fighter, someone striving to rise above her circumstances. He approached her, offering words of encouragement and promising to help her connect with influential figures in the art world. To Alana, James seemed like a godsend, a powerful ally who could open doors she had only dared to imagine. Their relationship began as a professional bond, built on mentorship and mutual admiration. James introduced Alana to gallery owners, arranged for her work to be featured in local exhibits, and even invited her to exclusive events that were far removed from her usual world. To anyone watching from the outside, it might have seemed like the mayor was simply fulfilling his promise to uplift talented individuals from marginalized communities. But behind closed doors, their connection grew deeper, more personal, and eventually, more romantic. For James, Alana represented an escape from the pressures of his political life. Her authenticity, her passion, and her unfiltered perspective were a stark contrast to the calculated, scripted existence he lived every day. With her, he felt a sense of freedom he hadn't experienced in years. For Alana, James was not only a mentor but someone who genuinely believed in her potential. She felt seen, valued, and, for the first time, hopeful about her future. Yet, their relationship was fraught with challenges from the start. James knew that any hint of an affair, let alone with a young woman from a vastly different background, would be catastrophic for his career. Alana, on the other hand, struggled to reconcile the man she was falling for with the polished politician she saw on television. There was an unspoken tension between them, rooted in the secrecy that defined their connection. To the public, James was untouchable. His near-perfect reputation made him a darling of the media and a rising star in national politics. He was a symbol of hope for a city that desperately needed it. Alana's role in his life, however, was a stark reminder of the vulnerability behind the facade. She was a young woman who had trusted him, who believed in his promises, not just for her future, but for the future of people like her. But the relationship that had once seemed like a refuge for both of them would soon become the catalyst for their undoing. Their secret bond, fragile and volatile, was destined to collide with the pressures of James's public life and the consequences of his past decisions. What began as a story of hope and mentorship would unravel into a tragedy neither of them could escape, leaving a city reeling and a bright young life extinguished far too soon. Beneath the polished exterior of James Carrington's political career lay a labyrinth of corruption. A web of secrets he had carefully hidden for years. While the public saw a man dedicated to progress and reform, the reality was far more sinister. James's meteoric rise to power wasn't solely the result of his charisma and policies, it was built on the foundations of shady deals, illegal campaign funding, and alliances with powerful criminal syndicates. These underhanded activities provided the financial backing and political leverage that ensured his dominance in Los Angeles politics. James knew the risks of these arrangements. He was fully aware that even a hint of scandal could destroy everything he had worked for. Yet, the allure of power and the need to maintain his image pushed him deeper into the shadows. Every bribe, every backroom deal, and every favor owed tightened the grip of his benefactors, leaving James trapped in a cycle he couldn't escape. He justified his actions as necessary evils, telling himself that his good deeds outweighed the compromises he had made. But the reality was that his empire was built on lies, and the cracks were beginning to show. Alana Johnson, for all her youth and optimism, was no fool. Spending time with James exposed her to the subtle but unmistakable signs of his darker dealings. She overheard whispered phone calls, noticed unmarked envelopes exchanged during private meetings, and witnessed the tension that crept into his demeanor whenever certain individuals were mentioned. At first, she brushed it off, telling herself it wasn't her place to ask questions. But as their relationship deepened, her curiosity turned into concern. One evening, while going through some paperwork James had left unattended, Alana stumbled across documents that painted a damning picture of his activities, financial records, transaction logs, and names that she recognized from the news. Shocked and horrified, she confronted James, demanding answers. For the first time, the man who had always seemed so composed and confident faltered. He tried to deflect, to reassure her that everything he did was for the greater good, but Alana wasn't convinced. "You're lying to me," she said, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and disappointment. "You stand up there and talk about justice and integrity, but you're no better than the people you claim to fight against. How can I trust you?" James was cornered. Alana's words cut deeper than he expected, and the fear of losing her collided with the fear of losing everything else. He pleaded with her to keep quiet, promising that he would find a way to fix things, to make it all right. But Alana wasn't satisfied with empty promises. She wanted honesty, accountability, and a relationship built on trust, not lies. When Alana threatened to expose both their relationship and his corrupt dealings, James felt his world begin to crumble. The thought of scandal, the media frenzy, and the inevitable end of his career consumed him. Desperate, he turned to his closest advisors, the same people who had helped him navigate the murky waters of politics. He told them about Alana, framing her as a young woman who had become unpredictable and emotional. His advisors, hardened by years of protecting James from potential threats, saw the situation in black and white. Alana, they argued, was a liability, a ticking time bomb that could destroy everything. While James hesitated, grappling with the morality of their suggestions, his advisors took matters into their own hands. They reached out to their network, hiring a ruthless enforcer to handle the situation. James, despite his mounting guilt, convinced himself that this was the only way to protect his legacy. He assured himself that Alana would simply be scared into silence, that no harm would come to her. But deep down, he knew the risks. He knew that by involving these men, he was setting events into motion that he might not be able to control. As the days passed, Alana grew increasingly distant. She was no longer the bright, hopeful young woman James had fallen for. She felt betrayed, trapped in a situation she couldn't escape. And though she didn't know it yet, the danger looming over her was far greater than she could have imagined. For James, the burden of silence became unbearable. Every time he saw Alana, guilt gnawed at him, but his fear of losing everything was stronger. He had crossed a line, and there was no turning back. What he didn't realize was that the decisions he had made wouldn't just cost him his career, they would cost Alana her life. The moment James Carrington agreed to let his advisors handle Alana Johnson, he sealed both their fates. He told himself it would be a simple scare tactic, a way to ensure her silence without causing harm. His advisors assured him it was routine, nothing to worry about, and James clung to that reassurance, desperate to believe it. But the men they hired were not the type to leave loose ends. The enforcer tasked with intimidating Alana was notorious for his brutal methods, a man who saw fear as his most powerful tool. Alana, however, was not the type to be easily intimidated. When he approached her one evening as she walked home, she stood her ground, refusing to be silenced. She threatened to go to the police, to expose everything she knew about James and his corrupt dealings. Her defiance enraged the enforcer, who realized she was far more dangerous than James had let on. What should have been a calculated act of intimidation spiraled out of control. In a fit of rage and desperation, the enforcer kidnapped Alana, taking her to a secluded location. There, his attempt to resolve the situation turned fatal. By the time the night was over, Alana was gone, her bright future extinguished in an act of senseless violence. Her body was left in an abandoned lot, a stark reminder of how far James's world had descended into darkness. When news of Alana's disappearance broke, it sent shockwaves through her community. Friends and family described her as a talented, kind-hearted young woman with her whole life ahead of her. Her sudden disappearance didn't make sense, and the people who loved her demanded answers. Vigils were held, hashtags flooded social media, and pressure mounted on the LAPD to find her. James, ever the consummate actor, played his part perfectly. Standing before cameras with a carefully rehearsed statement, he expressed his grief and shock, calling Alana's disappearance a tragedy, and vowing to support the investigation in any way he could. To the public, he appeared devastated, a man mourning the loss of a promising young woman he had mentored. But behind the scenes, he was working tirelessly to ensure that the investigation hit a dead end. Using his political connections, James orchestrated subtle but effective interference. Evidence was misplaced, leads went cold, and key witnesses suddenly refused to cooperate. He paid off officers, leaned on his allies in City Hall, and even manipulated the media to shift focus away from the case. But despite his efforts, rumors began to swirl. Whispers about his relationship with Alana, about the shady figures who surrounded him, started to emerge. For James, the weight of what had happened was unbearable. He had crossed a line he never thought possible, and the consequences were unraveling faster than he could control. Night after night, he was haunted by visions of Alana, her smile, her voice, the look in her eyes the last time they spoke. He tried to convince himself it wasn't his fault, that he never intended for her to be harmed, but the guilt was inescapable. The murder of Alana Johnson wasn't just the end of her life, it was the breaking point in James Carrington's double life. The man who had been a symbol of hope and progress was now a man consumed by fear and regret. The walls of his carefully constructed world were closing in, and it was only a matter of time before the truth came crashing down. Alana Johnson's murder sent ripples of grief and outrage through Los Angeles. The vibrant young woman who had captured the hearts of her community became a symbol of the systemic injustices that had plagued the city for decades. Her death was not just a personal tragedy, it was a spark that ignited widespread protests. Activists, artists, and ordinary citizens took to the streets, demanding answers and justice for Alana. They marched through South Los Angeles with her portraits held high, chanting her name, determined to ensure her story would not be forgotten. The media descended on the case, dissecting every detail of Alana's life and her mysterious connection to Mayor James Carrington. Journalists unearthed her art, her social media posts, and interviews with friends and family, painting a picture of a talented, driven young woman with dreams of changing the world. But alongside these tributes came questions. Uncomfortable ones about why she had been so close to the city's most powerful man and what secrets she might have known. James, once the media's darling, found himself at the center of a storm. His polished image began to crumble as reporters dug deeper into his life. Whispers of his corruption and personal scandals grew louder, and the public that had once adored him now looked at him with suspicion. Was he truly the grieving mentor he claimed to be, or was there more to the story? Polls showed his approval ratings plummeting as the people of Los Angeles began to doubt the integrity of the man they had trusted. While the city mourned and speculated, Detective Maria Torres worked tirelessly to uncover the truth. A seasoned investigator known for her tenacity, Torres had been following the case from the start. What began as a missing persons report quickly evolved into a murder investigation, and Torres was determined to find justice for Alana. The first breakthrough came from testimony. A witness, initially reluctant to speak out, revealed seeing a suspicious figure near Alana's neighborhood on the night of her disappearance. This led Torres to a known associate of the criminal syndicate tied to James's campaign finances. A closer look at financial records revealed unexplained payments from James's political accounts to shadowy entities connected to the enforcer who had abducted Alana. But the most damning evidence came from a recorded conversation obtained from a confidential source. In the audio, James could be heard discussing Alana with his advisors, referring to her as a problem that needed to be dealt with. His tone was cold and calculated, a stark contrast to the compassionate leader he portrayed in public. The recordings, coupled with the financial trail and witness testimony, painted a clear picture of James's involvement. Torres presented her findings to her superiors, urging them to pursue charges against the mayor. The case was airtight, but the decision to go after someone as powerful as James Carrington was not one to be taken lightly. As the evidence mounted, the city's unrest grew. Protesters camped outside City Hall, demanding James's resignation and an independent investigation into Alana's death. Vigils turned into rallies, and hashtags calling for justice trended nationwide. The pressure was mounting, and James's carefully constructed world was on the brink of collapse. For James, the walls were closing in. His public denials and deflections could no longer hold back the tide of accusations. Every news segment, every protest sign, every chant of Alana's name was a reminder of the truth he had tried so desperately to bury. The man who had once been Los Angeles's brightest hope was now its greatest disappointment, and the city would not rest until justice was served. The reckoning for James Carrington was as swift as it was inevitable. After months of investigation, mounting evidence, and growing public outrage, the authorities made their move. In a dramatic early morning raid, FBI agents and LAPD officers arrived at James's sprawling mansion. News helicopters circled overhead as officers escorted the disgraced mayor out in handcuffs. The sight of him, head bowed and flanked by agents, was broadcast live across the country, a chilling image of a leader brought to his knees. James was charged with obstruction of justice, conspiracy, and multiple counts of corruption. The charges shocked the city and sent waves through the national political landscape. Once hailed as a rising star with aspirations for the highest office, James was now the face of betrayal. His arrest was a turning point, not just for his career but for the city of Los Angeles, which demanded answers and accountability for years of unchecked power and corruption. The trial was nothing short of a media circus. Every detail of James's life and crimes was scrutinized, dissected, and debated. The prosecution presented damning evidence, from financial records to the recorded conversation that revealed his role in orchestrating Alana's silence. Testimonies from his advisors and associates painted a picture of a man consumed by ambition, willing to sacrifice anyone to maintain his image. James's defense team fought hard to absolve him of direct responsibility for Alana's murder. They argued that while he had made poor decisions, he never intended for her to be harmed. The enforcer, they claimed, acted independently and without James's knowledge. It was a strategy aimed at avoiding the most severe charges, and it worked. Despite the overwhelming evidence tying him to the conspiracy, the jury could not conclusively link him to the act of murder. The verdict was met with mixed reactions. James was acquitted of murder but found guilty of obstruction of justice, conspiracy, and corruption. The judge sentenced him to 15 years in federal prison, calling his actions a gross abuse of power and a betrayal of the public trust. For many, the sentence was a bitter pill to swallow. While some saw it as justice served, others believed it was too lenient, especially given the life that had been lost. The fallout from James's conviction was immense. His political career, once the envy of aspiring leaders, was utterly destroyed. His name became synonymous with corruption and betrayal, a cautionary tale of how power can corrupt even those who claim to stand for the people. His supporters abandoned him, his allies distanced themselves, and his family, once his greatest asset, dissolved under the weight of the scandal. Outside the courtroom, Alana's family and community continued to mourn her loss. Her mother, standing before reporters after the verdict, expressed both relief and heartbreak. "No sentence will bring my daughter back," she said through tears. "But at least the world knows the truth. At least her voice wasn't silenced." James, now stripped of his power, spent his days in a stark prison cell, far removed from the life of luxury and influence he had once known. Letters from former supporters, once filled with praise, now carried words of condemnation and disappointment. He was left to reflect on the choices that had led him here, the lies, the betrayals, and the fear that had driven him to destroy the very thing he had once claimed to protect. For Los Angeles, the case became a symbol of reckoning. It sparked reforms in campaign finance laws, greater scrutiny of elected officials, and renewed calls for justice and equality. Alana's legacy lived on, not just as a victim but as a catalyst for change. Her story became a rallying cry, reminding the city that even in the darkest moments, the truth has the power to prevail. As James stared out from behind bars, he couldn't escape the one haunting thought: it didn't have to end this way. But by the time he realized it, it was far too late. This tragic case pulls back the curtain on the dangerous intersection of power, privilege, and unchecked ambition. James Carrington, once the epitome of hope and progress, allowed his greed and fear to destroy not only his own life but the life of an innocent young woman. Alana Johnson's death serves as a stark reminder of the human cost behind the carefully curated facades of the powerful. At its heart, this story is about more than just corruption, it's about betrayal. Betrayal of trust, of values, and of the people who believed in James's vision for a better city. His downfall was not just the loss of a leader but the collapse of an illusion, leaving behind a city forever scarred and a community mourning a future that will never be. And yet, amidst the heartbreak, this case has sparked a critical conversation. Could Alana's life have been saved if James had chosen integrity over self-preservation? How do we hold those in power accountable, ensuring that their influence does not shield them from justice? These questions linger, demanding answers not just from individuals but from society as a whole. As we close this chapter, let Alana Johnson's story be a call to action. A reminder that justice requires vigilance, and silence in the face of wrongdoing only perpetuates harm. If this story left you speechless, be sure to like and subscribe to Inspector Stan for more deep dives into the shocking tales of lies, corruption, and the relentless pursuit of justice. Because every story, no matter how dark, deserves to be told.